All right, let's dive in. Today, we're going to pull on a thread from history to see how a single meeting in a single European city over a century ago is still casting a massive shadow over modern Africa.
And that's not an exaggeration. We're talking about a conference in Berlin back in 1885 that, as one legal scholar put it, created unsolvable problems. And those problems, from border disputes to ethnic tensions, are still very much alive today.
So that's the big question, right? How can these lines, drawn by people who'd often never even been to Africa, still hold so much power? How do they continue to shape and define conflict? Well, that's what we're here to figure out.
To really get a grip on this, we're going to start with a real-world example happening right now. Let's head to the Horn of Africa and look at a place called the Ilimi Triangle. And you know, we're not talking about some tiny, insignificant patch of land here. This is a massive area, about 14,000 square kilometers of semi-arid territory that's just caught in this incredible tangle of competing claims. And this is where it gets really complicated. You've got three different countries, Kenya, South Sudan, and Ethiopia, all saying this is ours. Plus, it's home to nomadic communities who've been moving across this land for generations, way before these countries even existed. And, just to turn up the heat, there's a good chance there's a lot of oil and natural gas under the ground.
This quote just nails the human side of the problem. For groups like the Turkana and the Toposa, their whole way of life, their survival, depends on being able to move with their herds. They follow the seasons, not the rigid lines on a map. And that's where you get this massive collision between traditional life and these old colonial borders.
So, where did these lines even come from? How did they get drawn in the first place? To answer that, we have to wind the clock all the way back to that Berlin conference.
You see, for hundreds of years, Europeans were mostly just dotted along the African coast in trading posts. But then, in the late 1800s, everything just exploded. The Industrial Revolution created this huge, hungry demand for resources, and explorers started pushing deep into the continent's interior, mapping everything they could find.
Which brings us to the key date, 1885, the year the Berlin Conference wrapped up and changed the map of Africa forever.
Now take a look at who was there. All the major European powers, the Ottoman Empire, even the United States. 14 powers in total, all sitting around a table to decide the fate of an entire continent. But what's really staggering is who wasn't there. Not a single African king or chief or representative was invited. Their continent was being carved up and they had absolutely no say in it.
The result of this conference was, well, a scramble. It basically fired the starting gun on a chaotic, full-speed race to claim territory.
Now, the conference didn't actually draw the borders itself. It did something way more impactful. It set up a rule called effective occupation. This basically meant if you could prove you had boots on the ground and some kind of administration, other European powers would recognize your claim. It was an open invitation to a massive land grab.
And here we get to the absolute heart of the problem. The borders that got drawn were all about European convenience. They used rulers to draw straight lines on maps, cutting right through ethnic groups, separating communities that had been together for centuries and completely ignoring natural boundaries like mountains and rivers. They created the blueprint for future conflict.
Okay, so let's fast forward now to the mid-20th century. African nations are fighting for and winning their independence, but they inherit this mess of a map, and they're faced with an absolutely impossible choice.
I mean, think about it. What do? Option A, you try to redraw the entire continent's borders to match up with the people on the ground, but that would almost certainly lead to decades of war. Or Option B, you accept the borders you are handed, knowing that you're also accepting all the built-in problems and disputes that come with them.
And they made a choice. In 1964, at a big meeting in Cairo, the brand new Organization of African Unity, or OAU, made a tough, pragmatic call. They decided that to prevent endless conflict, they would all agree to respect the borders as they existed the moment they became independent. It was a choice for stability over correction.
But here's where a really common misunderstanding creeps in. People often mix up the OAU's decision with a totally different legal idea, and telling them apart is absolutely crucial to understanding what's going on.
That idea has a fancy Latin name, Iudi Possidetis Juris. It's a legal doctrine that came out of Latin America's independence movements in the 1800s. The basic idea is that the old administrative lines drawn by the colonizers automatically become the new international borders. The authority for those borders comes directly from the old colonial laws. Okay,
So let's put these two side by side, because this is the whole ballgame. On one side, you have uti possidetis juris. It's a legal doctrine. It says you inherit the colonial lines and their legal authority. On the other side, you have the OAU's principle. This is a political principle. It's not about inheriting colonial law. It's a pragmatic agreement made by free African states to accept a flawed map to keep the peace. The authority comes from their agreement, not from the old colonizers. It's a huge difference.
And when you really get that distinction, conflicts, like the one in the Elemi Triangle, start to look a lot clearer.
You realize this isn't some simple argument about where to put a border post. No, it's a collision of history, culture, and politics, all playing out in one place.
So what you have in the Elemi Triangle is a perfect storm. You have the arbitrary lines from 1885. You have the real, on-the-ground needs of nomadic people whose lives ignore those lines. Then you have the pragmatic, post-colonial decision to freeze everything in place for the sake of peace. It's this deep, complicated tangle of history and human need.
And all of this leaves us with one final, really difficult question. When the very map you're using is fundamentally flawed, how do you even begin to build a stable and prosperous future on top of it? That, right there, is the unresolved legacy of 1885.